Black girl slept in a playground every night. Cop discovers the truth and breaks down in tears. Officer Thomas can't understand why a young girl spends her nights alone at a playground, but when he decides to get involved, he uncovers a heartbreaking secret, one that will change his life forever. But will it be too late to save her? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. The playground, surrounded by towering trees and the quiet hum of the night, had become Mia's refuge. The old swing set squeaked in the breeze, the slide was rusted, and the merry-go-round had long since stopped spinning. Yet, this forgotten corner of the world was where Mia chose to stay, night after night, under the dim street lamp. To those who passed by, she was an enigma, a lonely silhouette against the twilight. Officer Thomas first noticed Mia during one of his late patrols. She was hard to miss, the only person around at that time of night, sitting with her knees tucked under her chin on the same wooden bench, her oversized jacket hanging loosely on her small frame. At first, he didn't think much of it. Teenagers often lingered in the park after dark, trying to escape their homes or the monotony of their lives. But Mia was different. She wasn't causing trouble, she wasn't with a group of friends, and she wasn't out late just for fun. She was always alone. As the weeks passed, Thomas found himself growing more curious. He began noticing her more regularly, as though she had become part of the landscape, an ever-present figure in the shadows. She rarely moved, rarely looked up, and never interacted with anyone. It was as if she was trying to disappear into the night, hoping no one would notice her existence. One evening, after a long shift, Thomas made his usual drive past the park. There she was again, sitting silently on the bench. His curiosity got the better of him. Parking his patrol car a short distance away, he stepped out and approached her. "Hey," he called softly, trying not to startle her. Mia didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the frayed edges of her sleeves. Up close, Thomas noticed just how young she looked. No more than 13 or 14, though the tired lines on her face suggested a lifetime of struggles beyond her years. "You okay out here?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle, as though speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile silence that hung between them. Still, Mia didn't respond. Thomas crouched down slightly, trying to meet her gaze. "It's getting late. It's not safe to be out here alone." For the briefest moment, Mia's eyes flickered up to meet his, and in that instant, Thomas saw a depth of pain that made his heart ache. But just as quickly, she looked away, her lips pressed together in a thin line. She said nothing, her body language closed off, as if every word she could say had been swallowed by the weight of her silence. Thomas knew he wasn't going to get much out of her tonight. He sighed softly and stood back up. "All right," he said, his tone laced with concern. "I'll leave you alone for now. But if you need help, I'm here, okay?" He walked back to his car, glancing over his shoulder one last time. Mia hadn't moved. She was still sitting there, as though rooted to the spot. Something about the way she hunched over, so small and fragile, made him feel like he was missing something important. As he drove away, her image lingered in his mind, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt a pull to do more than just watch her from afar. The following days were filled with routine calls and paperwork, but Mia remained in the back of Thomas's mind. Every night, he found himself driving past the playground, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. Each time she was there, always in the same spot, always alone. It wasn't until the third week that he decided he couldn't just leave her there anymore. There was something wrong, and the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. He had seen plenty of runaways and kids from broken homes, but Mia didn't fit the usual pattern. She wasn't rebellious or angry. She wasn't looking for trouble. If anything, she seemed to be trying to avoid it, blending into the background as if she wanted to disappear entirely. One night, as the wind whipped through the park, Thomas made up his mind. This time, he wasn't going to just check on her. He was going to talk to her, really talk to her, and find out why she kept coming back to this lonely, abandoned place. Parking his car at the edge of the lot, Thomas took a deep breath before approaching the bench where Mia sat. The night was colder than usual, and he could see her shivering under her thin jacket. His heart ached at the sight. "Hey, Mia," he said softly, this time using the name he had overheard from a conversation between two kids at the local diner. "Do you mind if I sit with you?" To his surprise, Mia didn't flinch at the sound of her name. She still didn't look at him, but she didn't protest either. Taking her silence as an agreement, Thomas sat down on the edge of the bench, leaving plenty of space between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rustling leaves and the occasional hum of a passing car filled the quiet. "I'm not here to bother you," Thomas said after a while. I'm worried about you, that's all. You've been coming here a lot, and I want to make sure you're okay." Mia shifted slightly, but still didn't speak. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white from the tension. Thomas could see the battle she was fighting within herself, whether to trust him or keep him at a distance. "I get it," he continued, his voice low and comforting. "You don't know me, and I don't know you. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure." For the first time in weeks, Mia turned her head slightly, just enough to give him a sidelong glance. Her eyes were dark and heavy with the weight of unspoken words. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then she closed it again, her lips trembling. Instead, she gave a small nod. Barely perceptible, but it was something. Thomas felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As he stood up to leave, he glanced back one last time. "I'll see you around, Mia. Take care of yourself." And with that, he walked back to his car, the image of the lonely girl on the playground bench etched deeply into his mind. There was more to her story. He could feel it. And no matter what it took, he was determined to find out the truth behind the silence. Officer Thomas found it difficult to shake the image of Mia from his mind. Over the next few days, as he went about his usual duties, she lingered in his thoughts like a shadow, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. He had seen enough during his time as a police officer to recognize when someone was in trouble. Yet with Mia, it was different. She wasn't involved in any obvious crime, and she wasn't causing a disturbance. It was the silence that unnerved him the most. It felt like a storm brewing just beneath the surface, and he couldn't stand by and watch it go unchecked. On a particularly quiet afternoon, Thomas decided to do what he could to learn more about her. He couldn't let this go. His instincts told him there was more to the story, and he needed to find out what it was. He started by talking to a few of the local shop owners and residents near the playground, hoping someone knew something about her. At first, his inquiries were met with indifference or mild curiosity. Most people had seen Mia in passing but didn't pay her much attention. The responses were the same everywhere he went. "Oh, that girl? Yeah, she's around sometimes. Always looks a little down, but I figured she was just going through a rough patch. You know how teenagers are. She's always alone, though. Kinda strange for a kid that age, but it's none of my business." It wasn't until he visited a small corner store near the park that he encountered a more troubling response. The older man behind the counter, Mr. Harris, had been in the neighborhood for decades and had seen the community change over the years. He didn't recognize Mia by name, but when Thomas described her, Harris's expression shifted into one of quiet disapproval. "You talking about that black girl that hangs around the playground at night?" Harris asked, a slight edge in his voice. Thomas felt a tightening in his chest. "Yes, that's her. Do you know anything about her? Maybe where she lives, or if she has family nearby?" Harris shrugged, clearly unimpressed by the question. "Don't know much, but I'll tell you this, she doesn't belong here. Kids like her, they don't usually come from good homes. Always out at night, never with her own kind. You might want to keep an eye on her before she gets into trouble." The implication behind Harris's words wasn't lost on Thomas. He had heard it before, words laced with an underlying prejudice, a belief that people could be judged by the color of their skin or where they came from. It didn't matter that Mia was just a quiet, lonely girl sitting on a park bench. To some people, that alone was enough to cast suspicion on her character. Thomas felt a flash of anger, but kept his composure. "I appreciate the information, but she's just a kid. I don't think we should jump to conclusions." Harris shrugged again, clearly indifferent. "Suit yourself, officer. Just thought you should know." As Thomas left the store, his mind raced. He had expected to find out more about Mia's situation, but instead, he had been reminded of how quick people were to judge based on appearances alone. It wasn't just Mia's silence that kept her isolated, it was the assumptions people made about her without even bothering to know her story. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became to help her. He knew that finding out the truth wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut that Mia was in desperate need of someone to see her for who she really was, beyond the prejudices of the world around her. That evening, Thomas returned to the playground, hoping to catch Mia again. She was there, as expected, sitting in her usual spot with her knees drawn up to her chest. The wind had picked up, and her jacket flapped lightly in the breeze, too thin to keep her warm. Thomas approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Mia," he called softly, stopping a few feet away. She looked up, her face pale in the fading light. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but as always, her guard was firmly in place. She didn't say anything, but she didn't turn away either. Thomas took that as a good sign and slowly sat down on the edge of the bench. He didn't press her with questions, knowing that her trust was something that had to be earned slowly, patiently. "I talked to some people around here," he began, his voice calm and measured. "They don't know much about you, but I got the feeling they've made up their minds about you without ever talking to you." Mia's gaze dropped to the ground, her fingers tightening around the hem of her jacket. Her silence spoke volumes. "I know it's not fair," Thomas continued. "People can be quick to judge when they don't know the whole story. But I want to hear yours, if you're ready to tell it." For a long moment, Mia didn't respond. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Thomas wondered if he had pushed too hard, too fast. But then, to his surprise, Mia let out a soft sigh, and her shoulders slumped as though the weight of the world had finally become too heavy to carry. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Thomas leaned in slightly, not wanting to miss a word. "What do you mean?" Mia took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on the ground. "My mom, she's gone. And my dad, he's not around anymore. I've been staying with my aunt, but it's not working out." The words tumbled out slowly as though each one was a struggle to release. Thomas could hear the pain in her voice, the raw vulnerability of a girl who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Where's your aunt?" he asked gently. Mia hesitated before answering. "She lives on the other side of town, but she doesn't really want me there. She said she'd take me in after my mom, after she passed away, but it's been hard. She has her own family, and there's not much room for me." Thomas felt a pang of sympathy. It wasn't an uncommon story. Families torn apart by tragedy, kids slipping through the cracks of the system, unwanted by those who should have been their support. He knew there were too many Mias out there. Kids who had nowhere to turn. "Have you talked to anyone about it? Social services, maybe?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. Mia shook her head. "I don't want to be a burden. I thought I could handle it on my own, but..." Her voice trailed off, and Thomas could see the tears welling in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, trying to maintain the tough exterior she had built around herself. "You're not a burden," Thomas said softly. "No one should have to go through this alone, especially not at your age. There are people who can help. People who want to help." Mia didn't respond, but Thomas could see the struggle in her expression. She wanted to believe him, but years of feeling unwanted had taught her not to trust so easily. "I'm not here to force you into anything," Thomas continued. "But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. And if you decide you want help finding a safer place to stay, I can help with that too." For the first time, Mia looked directly at him, her dark eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas paused, caught off guard by the question. It was a simple question, but the answer wasn't so simple. He cared because he had seen too many kids like Mia slip through the cracks, their lives derailed by circumstances beyond their control. He cared because it was his job to protect people, especially those who couldn't protect themselves. But more than that, he cared because, in Mia, he saw a reflection of the pain and isolation that so many people carried in silence. "I care," Thomas said finally, Because you deserve better, and because no one should have to go through this alone. For a brief moment, Mia's guard seemed to lower, just a fraction. She gave a small nod, as if to acknowledge his words, even if she wasn't ready to fully trust them yet. As Thomas stood to leave, he glanced back at her one last time. There was still so much he didn't know, so much she hadn't told him. But for now, it was enough. He had taken the first step in breaking through the walls Mia had built around herself, and he wasn't going to stop until he found a way to help her. Days turned into weeks, and Officer Thomas continued his quiet vigil over Mia, returning to the playground every evening, bringing her small things, warm meals, a blanket, sometimes just a listening ear. Mia had grown accustomed to his presence, though she still spoke little. She was a girl made of silence, and Thomas had learned to respect the unspoken boundaries she put up around herself. Each interaction was a delicate dance. Pushing too hard would only cause her to retreat further into her shell. But he noticed the small changes. Where once she avoided eye contact, now she would meet his gaze, if only for a fleeting moment. Where once she would answer in monosyllables, now she gave him whole sentences, piecing together her story in fragmented whispers. It was late one evening, colder than usual, when Thomas found her again in the playground. She sat on the bench as always, but this time her posture seemed more relaxed, less guarded. The blanket he had given her the week before was draped over her shoulders, and her hands, usually clenched tight in anxiety, rested loosely in her lap. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets, the cool breeze tugging at the collar of his jacket. "Hey, Mia," he greeted softly. "Hi," she replied, her voice barely louder than the wind rustling the leaves. It was the first time she had greeted him without prompting, and that small gesture made Thomas's heart lift. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, as he always did. She gave a small nod, and he took his place at the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. For a few moments they sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the faint creak of the swing set and the distant hum of passing cars. Then, to his surprise, Mia spoke. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the last traces of daylight were fading into night. "About everything." Thomas waited, sensing that this was something important, something she had been carrying for too long and was finally ready to share. "I don't know how to feel anymore," Mia continued, her voice trembling just a little. "It's like nothing makes sense, and no matter what I do, it feels like people already decided who I am before I even open my mouth." Thomas felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, the same heavy feeling that had plagued him since he first saw Mia sitting alone on that bench. "What do you mean?" he asked gently, even though he had an idea. Mia's eyes flickered with frustration. "It's like they see me and they think they know me. They look at my skin and they think they know where I come from, what I've done, what I'm going to do." She paused, her hands balling into fists in her lap. "They don't even give me a chance." Thomas's throat tightened. He had seen it before, in his years on the force, how quickly people judged, how easily they made assumptions based on nothing more than appearance. He had heard the quiet whispers in the community about Mia, the dismissive comments that suggested she didn't belong, that she was trouble waiting to happen. It made him angry, but it also made him deeply, profoundly sad. "I know it feels like that sometimes," Thomas said softly, "and I'm not going to lie to you, it's not fair. People can be cruel, and they can be ignorant, but you're not what they think. You're so much more than that." Mia's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, as if ashamed of her own vulnerability. "But what does it matter?" she asked, her voice cracking. "It doesn't change anything. My mom's gone, my dad's gone, and my aunt, she doesn't want me. So what am I supposed to do?" Thomas's heart broke at the raw pain in her words. He wanted to reach out, to offer some kind of comfort, but he knew that this was a battle Mia had to fight on her own terms. He could be there for her, but he couldn't fix what was broken inside her. All he could do was listen. "I'm so sorry, Mia," he said quietly. "I know it feels hopeless right now, but you're not alone, okay? You've got me, and I'm not going to let you fall through the cracks." Mia looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, Thomas saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was small, fragile, but it was hope. A glimmer of belief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she had always felt. But what if, she began, her voice faltering. What if it doesn't get better? What if this is all there is? Thomas shook his head, his voice firm but gentle. It will get better. I know it's hard to believe right now, but it will. You've just got to hold on a little longer. There are people who care about you, who want to help. You just have to let them in. Mia's shoulders sagged, the weight of her emotions clearly overwhelming her. I don't know how, she whispered. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore. Thomas understood. Trust was a delicate thing, especially for someone who had been hurt as deeply as Mia. But he also knew that trust was something that could be rebuilt, piece by piece, if given the chance. It's okay to be scared, he said softly. And it's okay to take things one step at a time. You don't have to figure it all out right now. But I promise you, Mia, you're stronger than you think. And I'm going to be here for you, no matter what. For a long time, Mia said nothing. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't the tense, guarded silence of before. It was something softer, something that felt almost like understanding. Finally, Mia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Why do you care so much? Thomas paused, considering his answer carefully. He could have given her the simple answer, the one that made sense on the surface, because he was a cop, because it was his job to help people. But that wasn't the truth, not entirely. I care, he said slowly, because I see you, Mia. I see what you're going through, and I see how hard you're fighting, even if it doesn't feel like it. And I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like the world is stacked against you. I don't want you to go through that by yourself. Mia stared at him, her dark eyes wide and filled with something Thomas couldn't quite place. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. For the first time, he felt like they had reached an understanding. A fragile connection that, if nurtured, could grow into something stronger. As the night wore on and the temperature dropped, Thomas stood to leave, giving Mia one last look. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Don't forget, you're not alone. Mia didn't respond, but as Thomas walked back to his car, he couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step in the right direction. And for now, that was enough. The more Officer Thomas learned about Mia, the more determined he became to help her. But he also knew that there were deeper layers to her story, layers she hadn't yet revealed. Despite their growing bond, Mia was still guarded, still carrying secrets that weighed heavily on her small frame. Thomas could sense it in her quiet moments, in the way she sometimes pulled back when their conversations got too close to the heart of things. One particularly cold night, Thomas decided to take a different approach. He brought her a cup of hot chocolate from a local cafe, hoping that the warmth of the drink might help ease her into talking more openly. When he handed it to her, Mia accepted it with a quiet "thank you" and cradled the cup in her hands, letting the warmth seep into her skin. They sat in silence for a while, the steam from the cup rising in the cold night air. Thomas wasn't sure how to broach the subject, but he knew it was time to dig deeper. Mia had been sleeping on a playground bench for too long, and he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her to face the winter without a proper home. Mia, he began cautiously, I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. About your mom, your aunt, everything. Mia's posture tensed slightly, but she didn't pull away. Thomas took that as a sign to continue. I don't want to push you, he said gently, but I feel like there's more to your story. I want to help, but I can't unless I know the whole truth. For a long moment, Mia said nothing. She sipped her hot chocolate, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon, and Thomas could see the wheels turning in her mind. Finally, she set the cup down on the bench beside her and took a deep breath. I never really told you about my dad, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas leaned in, listening intently. He had always suspected there was more to Mia's family situation than she had let on, but he hadn't wanted to push her too hard, too soon. Mia hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the frayed edges of her sleeves. My dad? He left when I was really young. I barely remember him. My mom always told me he wasn't a bad person, just lost. He couldn't handle the responsibility of being a father, so he left. Thomas nodded, his heart heavy with sympathy. He had heard stories like this before. parents who abandon their families, leaving the children to pick up the pieces. Mia continued, her voice growing softer. For a long time it was just me and my mom. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep us afloat. She always made sure I had what I needed, but it was hard. She was always tired, always stressed. There was a long pause as Mia gathered her thoughts. Thomas remained silent, giving her the space to speak at her own pace. When I was about 12, my mom got sick, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper now. At first, she didn't want to tell me. She kept saying it was just a cold or the flu and that she'd be fine. But it wasn't. It got worse, and eventually, she couldn't hide it anymore. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He had a sinking feeling where this story was headed, but he didn't interrupt. He wanted Mia to be able to tell it in her own way, without him rushing her. She was diagnosed with cancer, Mia continued, her eyes distant as though she were reliving the memories. It was aggressive, and by the time they caught it, it was too late. She didn't have much time left. Mia's voice cracked on the last words, and she quickly wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. Thomas's heart broke for her. He could only imagine the kind of pain she had gone through, losing a parent at such a young age, watching the only person who had ever been there for her slip away. She tried to stay strong for me, Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Even when the treatments weren't working, even when she could barely get out of bed, she kept telling me everything would be okay. But it wasn't. She died 6 months later. Thomas swallowed hard, trying to keep his own emotions in check. He wanted to reach out, to tell her how sorry he was, but he knew words wouldn't be enough. Nothing he could say would ever take away the pain of losing her mother. Mia took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to continue. After she died, I had to go live with my aunt. I didn't have anywhere else to go. My aunt? She wasn't a bad person, but she wasn't my mom. She had her own family to take care of, and I was just an extra burden. I don't think she ever wanted me there. She just took me in because she felt like she had to. Thomas could hear the bitterness in Mia's voice, the hurt that came from feeling unwanted, even by family. It was a pain he had seen before in other kids. Children who had lost their parents and were shuffled from one relative to another, always feeling like they didn't quite belong. She never said it outright, Mia continued, her voice soft, but I could tell. I was just in the way. She didn't have time for me, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I started spending more and more time at the playground. It was the only place where I felt, I don't know, safe? Maybe? Alone, but not as lonely. Thomas felt a deep ache in his chest. He had suspected Mia's home life was troubled, but hearing the full story made it all the more real. He had seen the signs of neglect, the emotional scars that Mia carried with her, but now he understood the full weight of the burden she had been carrying on her young shoulders. I don't want to go back, Mia said suddenly, her voice firm but filled with fear. I can't. My aunt doesn't want me there, and I don't want to be there, but I don't have anywhere else to go. Thomas's mind raced. He knew Mia's situation was far more complicated than he had initially thought. She was caught between a broken home and the harsh reality of a world that had failed her. The system, the people around her, everyone had let her down. She was slipping through the cracks, and no one seemed to care. Except him. Mia, Thomas said softly, I'm going to help you, I promise, but I need you to trust me, okay? We're going to figure this out together. Mia looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with uncertainty. How? She whispered. How can you help? No one's been able to help me before. Thomas reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Because I care, Mia. I'm not going to let you face this alone. We're going to find a way to get you the help you need. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? For a long moment, Mia didn't respond. Her eyes were filled with doubt, with fear, with the scars of a lifetime of being let down by the people who were supposed to protect her. But slowly, tentatively, she gave a small nod. Okay, she whispered. Thomas exhaled, relieved that she was finally letting him in. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. He knew there were still challenges ahead, still battles to be fought, but at least now, Mia wasn't fighting alone. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings with social services. Thomas worked tirelessly to find Mia a better living situation, somewhere she could feel safe and supported. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There were always obstacles in cases like this, bureaucratic red tape that slowed the process down. But he refused to give up. Each evening, he returned to the playground to check on Mia, updating her on the progress he was making and assuring her that things were going to get better. And slowly, he could see the weight lifting from her shoulders. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. As the weeks passed, Officer Thomas's efforts to help Mia finally started to yield results. He had managed to find a temporary shelter for her, one that was safe and had counselors who specialized in helping children from difficult backgrounds. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start, a step toward giving Mia the stability she so desperately needed. One evening, after a long day of dealing with paperwork and follow-up meetings with social services, Thomas drove to the shelter to check in on Mia. He found her sitting in the common area, reading a book. It was a simple, quiet moment, but seeing her there, inside, warm and safe, gave him a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the gnawing anxiety that had been his constant companion since the day he'd found her in the playground. When Mia saw him, she gave him a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had seen from her before, and it warmed his heart. "Hey Mia," Thomas said as he approached her. "How are you doing?" She shrugged, setting the book aside. "It's okay. Better than being at the playground, I guess." Thomas chuckled softly, taking a seat across from her. "That's good to hear. I wanted to talk to you about a few things. I've been working with social services, and we've got some options to discuss." Mia's face tightened slightly, the familiar tension returning. "Options?" Thomas nodded. "I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to pressure you into anything, but there's a family, foster parents, who are interested in meeting you. They're good people, and they've taken in kids before. I think it might be a good fit." Mia's expression was unreadable as she processed his words. Thomas waited patiently, giving her the space to think. "I don't know," Mia said quietly, her gaze dropping to the floor. What if they don't want me? What if it's just like my aunt all over again?" Thomas leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "This is different, Mia. These people want to help. They've been through the process before, and they understand what it means to take in someone who's been through what you've been through. But it's your choice. No one's going to force you into anything." Mia's hands twisted in her lap, her anxiety palpable. I don't want to get my hopes up. Every time I think things are going to get better, something happens, and it all falls apart." Thomas felt a deep pang in his chest. He understood Mia's fear. How could she believe in something better when all she had ever known was disappointment? He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Life was unpredictable, and he couldn't guarantee that things would work out perfectly. But he could offer her something else, something more important than guarantees. "I can't promise that everything will be easy," Thomas said softly. "Life doesn't always work that way. But I can promise you this. You're not alone anymore. I'm going to be here for you, no matter what. And these people, they want to be there for you too. They want to help you build something new, something better." Mia was quiet for a long time, her brow furrowed in thought. Thomas could see the battle playing out in her mind, the fear of being hurt again, the desire to trust, but the overwhelming urge to protect herself from more pain. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and hesitation. Do you think I could meet them? Just to see what they're like?" Thomas smiled, feeling a swell of relief and pride. "Of course. We'll set it up whenever you're ready. No pressure." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Thomas worked with social services to arrange a meeting between Mia and the foster family, a couple who had fostered several children before and had a reputation for being compassionate and understanding. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a family services center where Mia could feel comfortable and not overwhelmed by the idea of going to someone's home right away. When the day of the meeting arrived, Mia was nervous, and it showed. She fidgeted with the sleeves of her jacket, her eyes darting around the room as they waited for the family to arrive. Thomas sat beside her, offering quiet reassurances. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," he reminded her. "It's okay to take things slow." Mia nodded, but Thomas could see the anxiety etched in her face. She had been through so much already, and this was another hurdle, one that required her to put her trust in strangers yet again. When the foster parents arrived, a kind-looking couple in their early 40s, Mia immediately tensed up. Thomas stayed by her side as they introduced themselves. The woman, Carol, had a warm smile, and her husband, Robert, was calm and patient. They didn't push Mia to engage right away, respecting her need to take things at her own pace. The meeting went better than Thomas had hoped. Carol and Robert were kind, asking Mia gentle questions about her interests, her favorite books, and her favorite foods. They shared stories about their previous foster kids and the things they enjoyed doing as a family. Weekend trips to the beach, movie nights, cooking together. Mia was hesitant at first, but as the conversation continued, Thomas noticed her relaxing, even offering a few tentative smiles. When the meeting ended, Mia didn't say much, but as they walked back to the car, Thomas could tell she was processing everything. "What did you think?" Thomas asked once they were on the road. Mia shrugged, but there was a small flicker of something in her expression, something that looked a lot like hope. "They were nice. I didn't feel like they were pretending." Thomas smiled. "That's because they weren't. They really do care, Mia. But again, it's your decision. If you want to meet them again or spend more time with them, we can arrange that. Or, if you're not ready, that's okay too." Mia was quiet for a while, staring out the window. I think I'd like to see them again. But I'm still scared." "That's okay," Thomas reassured her. "It's normal to be scared, but you're not in this alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." Over the next few weeks, Mia spent more time with Carol and Robert. They invited her to their home for dinner, took her on small outings, and slowly began to introduce her to the possibility of becoming part of their family. Mia was still guarded. Thomas knew it would take time for her to fully open up, but there were small moments, glimmers of connection, that gave him hope. One evening, as they sat on the bench at the playground, Mia's old haunt, Thomas asked her how she was feeling about everything. "It's weird," Mia admitted, pulling her knees up to her chest. "I keep waiting for something bad to happen. Like it's too good to be true." Thomas nodded, understanding her fear. "I get it. After everything you've been through, it's hard to believe that things can get better. But sometimes, good things do happen, Mia, and you deserve to have something good in your life." Mia looked at him then, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also something else, something brighter. "Do you really think that? That I deserve it?" Thomas's heart ached at the question. He reached over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know it. You've been through so much, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve happiness. You're strong, Mia. Stronger than you think, and you deserve to have people in your life who love you and care for you." Mia didn't say anything for a long time, but then she gave a small nod, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Maybe you're right." Thomas smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. It had been a long, difficult journey, but they had come so far. And now, standing on the brink of a new chapter, he knew that Mia was going to be okay. The days that followed saw Mia slowly transitioning into her new life with Carol and Robert. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, of fear, but with Thomas's support and the unwavering kindness of her foster family, Mia began to heal. The playground, once a symbol of her isolation and pain, was now just a memory, a place she no longer needed to return to. And for Thomas, seeing Mia smile, seeing her begin to trust again, was all the reward he needed. He had fought for her, believed in her, and now she was finally getting the chance to live the life she deserved. As Mia's new life unfolded, Thomas found solace in the knowledge that compassion, empathy, and persistence could make all the difference in someone's life. The world wasn't always kind, but sometimes, with the right people by your side, it could be just a little bit brighter. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.